In 2012, Carly Zakin and Danielle Weisberg founded The Skim from their couch. Now, 6 years later, their morning newsletter gives over 7 million subscribers the news and information they need to start their day. And when they first started the company, they got a lot of advice from other female entrepreneurs. And now they're sharing those conversations and more on their podcast, Skimmed from the Couch, SKIMM' from the couch. Every week, you'll hear from women like Ariana Huffington, founder of the Huffington Post and Thrive, on why she puts her phone to bed at night, or Melanie Whalen, CEO of SoulCycle, on why she has a millennial mentor, or how actor Taraji P. Henson got over her first rejection and learned how to negotiate for herself. It's a podcast about the real stuff, tips and tricks to launch, grow, or change your career. The only rule on the couch, no BS. And check out Skimmed from the Couch wherever you listen to your podcasts.
9.
T-minus 8 seconds. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have ignition and liftoff.
Hello, Space Cadets, and welcome back to the Space News Podcast. My name is Will, and I'm beaming this down directly to you from the mothership. Now, I want to take a couple moments to thank everybody who supported this podcast by either giving it a rating, which is super important, subscribing to the podcast, which is also super important, just listening, that's also super important, and telling your friends about it on Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff. Very, very important. If you go to spacenewspodcast.com, you can get more information on how to follow us on all of our socials. And let me tell you something. There's some crazy stuff going on with Saturn's rings. NASA has reported in a new research paper that Saturn's rings are being lost in a worst case scenario. Now, don't get too worried, though, because it's going to take about 300 million years for this to happen. And NASA's expert, James O'Donoghue at Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, said, "We estimate that this ring rain drains amount of water products that could fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool from Saturn's ring in half an hour." Half an hour. That it drains that much water. It's an Olympic-sized swimming pool. That's a huge amount of water products. And he also goes along to say, from this alone, the entire ring system will be gone in 300 million years. But add to this, the Cassini spacecraft measured ring material detected falling into Saturn's equator, and the rings have less than 100 million years to live. And that's relatively short compared to Saturn's age of over 4 billion years. So I was a little bit off there when I said 300 million years. So they notched it down to 100 million years. Now, he goes on to say, we're lucky to be around to see Saturn's ring system, which appears to be in the middle of its lifetime. However, if rings are temporary, perhaps we just missed out on seeing giant ring systems on Jupiter, Uranus, and Neptune, which have only thin ringlets left. So could you imagine, seeing something like Saturn, but on Uranus? You see it through a telescope. You don't, like a backyard telescope, you don't really see any of the rings of Uranus, right? Neptune, Jupiter, you don't see those rings. You see the rings of Saturn, and it's a beautiful sight. Now, could you imagine in the past, if we were living along, millions and millions of years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago, if those planets had giant ring systems and you looked up into the sky with your telescope and you saw these beautiful, beautiful planets, that would be absolutely astounding. But for now, we have Saturn, which is the crown jewel of our solar system, and we're lucky to have that. But in 100 million years, that's all going to be gone. So there's many theories that have been proposed for the ring's origins, right? So if the planet got up later in life, they could have been formed when small icy moons in orbit around Saturn collided. And because their orbits were perturbed by a gravitational tug from a passing asteroid or a comet. So those little icy moons could have smashed into each other. And this is the debris, basically. This is the debris of those moons around Saturn. And Voyager, remember Voyager? Voyager's observations it was an unrelated phenomena when it saw these things, and peculiar variations in Saturn's electrically charged upper atmosphere, the ionosphere, the density variations in Saturn's rings, and a trio of narrow dark bands encircling the planet in northern mid-latitudes. And these dark bands appeared in images of Saturn's hazy upper atmosphere, which is the stratosphere, and that's by NASA's Voyager 2 mission in 1981. And these observations, that's where they came up with ring rain. They saw these things and they didn't know what they were, so they had to do some more studies on them. And in 1986, Jack Connerny of Goddard published a paper that linked those narrow dark bands to the shape of Saturn's enormous magnetic field, proposing that electrically charged ice particles from Saturn's rings were flowing down invisible magnetic field lines, dumping water into Saturn's upper atmosphere, where those lines emerged from the planet. And the influx of water from the rings, appearing at specific latitudes, washed away the stratospheric haze, making it appear dark and reflected light, producing the narrow, dark bands captured in the Voyager images. Saturn's rings are mostly chunks of water ice, ranging in size from microscopic dust grains to boulders several yards across, and ring particles are caught in a balancing act between the pull of Saturn's gravity, which wants to draw them back into the planet, and their orbital velocity, which wants to fling them outward into space. Tiny particles can get electrically charged by ultraviolet light from the sun or by plasma clouds emanating from micrometeoroid bombardment of the rings. And when this happens, the particles can feel the pull of the magnetic field, and it curves inward toward the planet of Saturn's rings. And in some rings, once charged, the balance of forces on these tiny particles changes dramatically, and Saturn's gravity pulls them in along the magnetic field lines into the upper atmosphere. So up there, the icy ring particles vaporize, and the water reacts chemically with Saturn's ionosphere. And one of those outcomes from this is the reaction is an increase in the lifespan of electrically charged particles called H3 plus ions, which are made up of 3 protons and 2 electrons. When energized by sunlight, the H3 plus ions glow in infrared light, which was observed by O'Donoghue's team using special instruments attached to the Keck telescope in Hawaii. So the team at Goddard, they want to do some more experiments, and they want to see how the ring rain changes with the seasons of Saturn. And as the planet progresses in its 29.4-year orbit, the rings are exposed to the sun to varying degrees. And since ultraviolet light from the sun changes the ice grains and makes them respond to Saturn's magnetic field, varying exposure to sunlight should change the quality and the quantity of the ring rain. So in about 100 million years, there will be no rings left around Saturn. All the icy particles that are flowing around Saturn right now in orbit around Saturn that could have been icy moons that collided millions and millions of years ago, they could all be gone. And when humans peer up into the sky from their telescopes, there will be no rings. We'll just see Saturn. Still a beautiful planet. Still an amazing view to be had by all. Thank you, Space Cadets, for listening today. I appreciate all of your support. Now, if you really like this podcast episode, please make sure to subscribe to the pod. Go to spacenewspodcast.com for all of our socials, and I will see you soon.